Yo, what's up everyone, it's Hacks. I just wanted to follow up on the video that I dropped about a week ago because I know it stirred up a ton of controversy and I think a lot of people were very confused as to where this video even came from and why it happened, what my motivations were for making the video. So I'm planning on making all of that very clear to you. I do want to apologize in advance for using some references that I shouldn't have within the video. The main reason that those references were in the video were because I needed to convey certain concepts like totalitarianism and self-engineered hero narrative, which is when someone throws someone else under the bus in order to become the hero. And unfortunately, the images and web pages that I wanted to use to illustrate those concepts had images of some very nasty people. And I probably could have found better ways to convey those concepts. I probably could have edited the photos up a little bit. So I do apologize for that. This video won't contain any references of that nature. This video will just be me talking to you the entire time. So I think that's also better because it'll be much more personal than my previous video. Because some people have been questioning my sanity after that video, and I do want to assure all of you that I'm perfectly fine. I knew everything that I was alleging during that video, and there's nothing to worry about in that regard. So, in terms of why I made the video, I am not only overwhelmingly concerned about the status quo of Melee and Smash in general right now, but I've been growing increasingly concerned over the past 8 to 10 years. And that's because for 8 years now, I've been carrying the collection of documents known as Evidence.zip. And these documents have been nothing but embellished and covered up by the press time and time and time again. And we've clearly gotten to a point where the current generation thinks of Evidence.zip as more of a myth rather than something that ever actually happened. And the reason that's very unhealthy is because it's caused the current generation to have the completely wrong idea of the person who Evidence.zip was written about. And I say that because Evidence.zip was actually one of the worst abuse cases in esports history. It was a collection of 9 testimonies. 4 people testified as victims, and then 5 people testified not necessarily as victims, but people who endured either mild abuse or witnessed mild to severe abuse. And you see, that's already really bad because in most abuse cases, there's 1 victim and 1 testimony, but Evidence.zip actually had 4 victims and a total of 9 testimonies. So just based on that alone, statistically, Evidence.zip was pretty significant, but everything in the press's power has been done to downplay its purpose. Give me 1 second. Alright, now, like I said, the corruption of the press has been a really big problem for me to witness this entire time. As someone who testified as a victim 8 years ago, for me to witness the way that this has been covered up has been very troubling. But what really drew the line for me was when half a year ago, Samox aired the documentary called Metagame. And Metagame was actually the first glimpse that the current gen had at any kind of Evidence.zip footage, and that's because Metagame interviewed a certain person who testified as a victim for Evidence.zip from Sweden. And the moment that Leffen saw this, he went ballistic on Twitter. He had what's called a narcissistic rage. That's the clinical term for what the way that he reacted. He basically did everything in his might to get Metagame censored. And the night that that happened, a lot of people were calling this out. They were saying, this is revisionist history. You absolutely shouldn't do this. This is going to send the community even further past the point of no return, where they just have no idea what the truth was. And those people were absolutely right. But the problem was that Leffen's influence was much greater than them, so he got his way, and Samox was forced to succumb. And I think this is just in general one of many ways that the culture of Melee is in a bad spot, because there are people like Leffen and Mango. Not to throw any shade at Mango, but these people are so above the law, it's not even funny. And we all know it too. If they want to get their way on just about anything, you're going to be screwed going up against them. So Leffen actually got his way that night. And the reason that's extremely corrupt is because Leffen not only got to censor the press, but then 4 months later, Samox came back with an announcement just this past April saying that he would actually reverse the press in Leffen's favor. meaning he was going to redeem himself by giving Leffen his own special episode at the end of Metagame. So Metagame was originally 8 episodes, and now Sam was going to make a 9th episode dedicated to Leffen. And this is actually such a corrupt series of events, if you think about it. How there could be a documentary with a victim testimony, and then the abuser goes nuts on Twitter and says, take that testimony down. And then the filmmaker has to actually redeem himself with a hero narrative for the abuser. This shows that there's something very, very wrong with the status quo of Smash. And so I wanted to intercept Sam Ox's new metagame broadcast, the one with the 9th episode, by showing people how much bullshit Leffen gets away with on a regular basis. Because the reality is, I think if you really know what's been going on within this scene over the course of the past 8 or so years, meaning since after Evidence.zip, there's enough content for an Evidence.zip 2. There's probably enough content for an Evidence.zip 3. It's genuinely really bad when you put together everything that he's done, but the problem is that because people were kept so in the dark about Evidence.zip 1, people haven't been seeing things from my perspective. You see, I've been viewing the past 8 years from the perspective of someone who testified for Evidence.zip 1, and so I was able to interpret a lot of things that people thought were being done in good faith as things that were being done with extremely malicious intent. Similarly, I've been able to interpret a lot of hero narratives that people thought were heroic in Leffen's favor as situations where he's actually clearly the abuser. And it just really seems to me, as someone who's viewing things from this lens, that things are beginning to spiral out of control, where the political cons are just becoming so constant and so increasingly grandiose that there really appears to be no end to this path of destruction. And the worst part is that all of this was predicted within Evidence.zip 1. If you read the testimonies within Evidence.zip 1, they tell you the trajectory only gets worse. As Leffen gets better as a player, he only becomes worse as a person. And there's people saying things like his path of destruction has to end. He's in his own tier of malicious intent and potential damage to the community. If we don't ban Leffen, our Swedish community is basically going to collapse. These were real things that were being said, and so people essentially labeled him as a threat to society. And when you see the real meaning behind a lot of his recent actions, they couldn't have been any more correct. So I'm eventually gonna go over a lot of those political cons that I went over in Evidence.zip 2, but what I want to start with is how I correctly called out the press just this past weekend. Because my call out not only couldn't have been any more correct, but it also couldn't have confirmed my theories any harder than it did. Because you see, what happened this past weekend was Leffen got, he got his featured episode. He got his featured 9th episode, and he proceeded to craft an entirely false narrative of how Evidence.zip came to be. So this was a deliberate attempt to brainwash the current generation. It cannot be classified as anything less than that. And if I hadn't intervened, he would have completely gotten away with it, and we would in fact have descended even further into the pits of not knowing what the hell is going on. So I'm gonna tell you what the hell is going on, because I've got a very good idea of what's going on. And what's going on is in 2013, this collection of documents called Evidence.zip was put together. The documents that labeled Leffen as a threat to society and basically suggested that a permanent ban verdict was in order. The 1-year ban really wasn't appropriate. They were very kind to him, considering the things he had done and the way that he responded to being banned as well, if you know the true story behind that. But then what happens from there is the press proceeds to cover literally everything incorrectly. 2015, TSM makes their documentaries. 2016, Red Bull makes their documentaries. The Red Bull documentaries were so egregious. They were literally titled Evidence.zip as though this was a hero story, and they contained slides that truly did push that narrative. Then in 2018, the Score Esports put out a documentary on Leffen. That documentary, I don't think he directly collaborated with them on, but he did manage to influence it quite heavily, because you see, on March 21st, 2013, Leffen put out a fake apology on Smashboards. That apology manipulated tons of people. You've probably read this apology. It's very well known within the Smash community. What people don't know, though, is that that apology was completely fake. That apology was basically the way that basically Leffen did a 180 after he realized that he wasn't going to get his way with his initial response, which was very much so the opposite of an apology. And so then he issued a fake one that was intended to manipulate people. That apology got picked up by the press in 2018, and so now the community is just further away from the truth. So now 2021, we've got metagame, and now Leffen is actually getting a featured episode where he gets to tell you what happened with Evidence.zip. And considering how many times he's pathologically lied about this throughout his career, this is checkmate right here. If this episode goes through, that's the way I saw it. It's just over. The true narrative is going to be a distant memory. So I couldn't have been any more right, because here's what happens. They basically created a narrative that can only be classified as such extreme propaganda that you would not see anything like this outside of a highly corrupt totalitarian society, which is exactly what I said in my last video. I described this as totalitarianism. Like, for the press to be this corrupt, I really can't think of anywhere else that you'd see it. So basically, the narrative that Leffen crafted was entirely made up. He said that on January 20th, Armada announced his retirement. Then on February 9th, Armada announced that Leffen was banned. And because there was only like a 3-week gap between those two events, Armada had tons of sway from announcing that he was retired. And so anything that he additionally said, like while he was on his way out, people were just going to agree with it because they really wanted to see him come back. And so they would let him get his way. This was a real narrative broadcasted by Samox on episode 9 of Metagame. Leffen was on screen the entire time telling this story. This episode was also produced by Alpha Zealot, who is the owner of Smashboards. So I'm hereby telling you that people such as Samox and Alpha Zealot are officially affiliated with fraud. That's how bad this is getting, the degree to which people are covering up the truth so that Leffen can be more marketable. Those people are now affiliated with fraud for providing you with this narrative, because they made it seem as though Armada just dropped, by the way, Leffen's banned, while he was on his way out. And me and Armada both know that's not the truth. I provided you with the truth. There's a collection of documents that totals over 100 pages in which 9 different people gave very lengthy testimonies. So that narrative was not the truth. And I'm going to tell you the truth about how Metagame got covered up 6 months ago, because what was broadcasted 6 months ago when Metagame first aired, something that Leffen absolutely doesn't want you to know about. If you knew the truth about the story that they showed glimpses of, you may not view Leffen the same way ever again. It would be very hard to, and especially now that you know how hard he's going to cover up the truth, it really shows that he never changed. I actually happen to believe he's only gotten worse, but nonetheless, I'll tell you what they covered up. So, last December when Metagame first ran, there was a kid named Rocky with a hearing aid, and they showed a couple minutes of interview footage with Rocky. And Rocky's probably the person who was abused the worst by Leffen in history. When you consider the immorality of what was done to him, man, I'm getting like a tear in my eye even thinking about it. It is just so bad. Sorry, man. So, Evidence.zip 1 sadly contains the testimony Rocky gave. Oh, it really is that bad. Holy shit, I haven't had tears in my eyes in like over a year. It's that bad though. So what would happen was Second. Rocky would keep trying to go to tournaments, and Leffen would ban him from going tournament after tournament after tournament. Fuck. Leffen kept banning him from going to the tournaments. 4 separate tournaments, he kept banning him. He kept telling his friend groups, like, yo, we're not going to allow this retard to go. And first he manipulates, like in summer of 2011, Leffen manipulates like this guy who used to host Smash Fests into into making it so Rocky couldn't go. Then Apex 2012 rolls around, and Rocky's trying to book his flight, and Leffen has the nerve to go to Rocky, and this is after many, many months of abuse, and Leffen has the nerve to go to Rocky and be like, yo, book my flight. And then Rocky's like, I'm not going to book your flight when you're literally the most abusive guy I've ever met. And so then Rocky's still nice enough to link Leffen to the bookings website. So he links him to the bookings website, and he's like, that's all I'm going to do for you. And then Leffen says, oh, that's all you're going to do for me? Well, then good luck coming to these upcoming tournaments in Norway and Finland. So Leffen ends up booking his ticket to Apex 2012, and then surely enough, down the line, he stays true to his promise of screwing Rocky over from going to the tournaments in Norway and Finland, because Leffen had control over who was going to ride in the car. And so Leffen bans Rocky from the trips to both of those tournaments, and Rocky has to like take trains and ferries to get to these tournaments. And then at one of these two, the one that came first, so I think the Norway tournament, Rocky gets there. He took like a train by himself to get there, and then during Rocky's tournament sets, Leffen starts screaming in his ear, like the ear that has the hearing aid. Leffen's literally screaming in his ear during tournament sets, and so yeah, I mean that really happened, and that's one of like many horrific abuse cases that were documented within Evidence.zip. There were 3 Swedes who got it really, really bad, and then I got it really bad. Leffen like stalked me on Smashboards for 2 straight years, and it got to the point where it was so excessive, so much worse than like literally anybody else stalking you. You know, it's like way worse than a bully. It's like actually a really high degree psychopath. That's the only way to put it. I mean, the complete lack of remorse and empathy is so inconceivable. And so all the people in Evidence.zip are saying things like, we don't even have words for how cruel this person is, or how evil this person is. Like, he just keeps lying and abusing us and stuff like that, and we can't stop him. But if you look at the way people perceive Leffen today, it's just so off. The gap is so bad. It's crazy. I've never seen a bigger gap in my life. This could actually be the biggest gap between perception and reality, um, like out there in all of esports. The fact that people think that Leffen's like a heroic guy. Some people seem to actually believe that, or that I'm the nutcase in this situation. That I'm the psycho who's going on some kind of a rant. It's the complete opposite. I actually just happen to know um, a lot of really, really dark shit. And so I want to fill in the current community on some of that dark shit. So I'll start with what happened directly after Leffen got banned. Or actually, I'll tell you how he initially responded to the Swedes' threats to ban him, because they told him that he was going to get banned many, many times. And the way that he responded is documented within Evidence.zip. He basically would either tell them, "You're never going to ban me, like you're never going to have the balls to ban me," or in one case, he even told the other guy that he was going to get banned. He was like, "Keep this up, and you're going to get banned." And that was one of the people who Leffen was abusing. So Leffen said it straight to this guy's face. So these people reached the point of realizing that they were dealing with someone who could not be reasoned with. So eventually they banned him as a last resort. They honestly waited way too long to do it, knowing what they were going through. And then the moment Leffen gets banned, he immediately starts manipulating literally everybody into believing that this should not have happened, that he had never actually abused anybody, and that he was reformed. Like, he started telling people he was reformed like the moment after they banned him. So this is all documented within Rocky's testimony. It's toward the end. It's the second testimony in Evidence.zip 1, which I provided you with. So Leffen basically does the most despicable thing possible. And then he condemns his local community, he calls them fake, he calls them doomed. But then what ends up happening is, around this time, Samox makes the Smash Brothers documentary, which, as I've always said, came out at the perfect time for Leffen, because around the time of Evidence.zip, Leffen was actually the most hated man in the Smash community. This was around when he enforced the pause rule against Scar and SFAT, so he got booed during that. He got booed when he played me at Apex 2013. There were literal crowds booing Leffen back during those days because of how toxic he was on the boards. But then Samox comes out with his first documentary, and that basically turns the scene into a brand new collection of players. So I think that clean slate could not have worked out at a better time for Leffen, because these new players didn't know anything about who he really was. And I think from there, the press really started to cover up the truth really well for him. So I'll continue with what ends up happening in 2013. In 2013, Leffen ends up making his fake apology, which manipulates a ton of the North Americans. But people like me, Rocky, and the rest of the people who testified for Evidence.zip, we all know damn well that apology was fake. So then, in April 2013, just 2 months after Leffen was banned, and just 2 weeks after his fake apology, he actually disturbs the peace at a Swedish tournament called Beast 3. So some of the people who testified for Evidence.zip were really happy that there was finally going to be a tournament without Leffen there. But then Leffen actually shows up at the door. This causes Rocky to have a panic attack when he sees Leffen at the door. So Leffen is disturbing the peace right off the bat. And then at EVO 2013, which was a few months later in July, he does something very similar with me, where I had been trying to get Leffen banned from this tournament, but Mr. Wizard denied my request. And then on the first night at EVO 2013, I find Leffen in my hotel room. Like, I go out, I leave my hotel room for a little bit to go to the Rio to go watch the World Series of Poker, and I call the person I was staying with, and I say, "Hey, I need to come back to grab my phone charger." And then he says, "Sure, but just so you know, Leffen's in our room." And so I'm like, what the fuck? Like, this guy is an actual stalker. It just seems like there's no getting rid of him. It's almost as if he's not in a cell, you can't get rid of him. It's that bad. So he disturbs the peace very badly that year. All the people who wanted him banned, did not get the justice that they were seeking whatsoever. He comes back in 2014. He has a good year. 2015, he gets picked up by TSM. I quit the game around that time. I was not fond of the Chillin money match, just knowing what I knew. I had a way different view of that whole thing, because the way I saw it, Chillin basically encountered like a hardcore sadist, basically. Like, if you read Evidence.zip, then you would know the type of person that Chillin encountered. And that was around when I started to feel like darkness was getting cast over the community, and that the community was truly shifting from the peaceful place that it once was. The community was just the atmosphere in the community was way different before Leffen started to make a name for himself, and that's exactly what the Swedes told you would happen. They basically said he cast darkness over our entire community, and if he's not contained, he's going to do it to the entire world. So I think the Chillin money match was actually kind of like the beginning of that. And as entertaining as it may have been for the public, I didn't like seeing it, because Chillin's a nice guy, and Leffen kind of did that whole thing so that he could get sponsored more quickly. So this goes to show the Machiavellianism that I was talking about in my previous video. Machiavellianism basically means you will do amoral things to get ahead. Like, if you can toss someone's like reputation completely in order to get sponsored more quickly, someone who's high on the Machiavellian scale will do that. So that's kind of what Leffen did to Chillin there. So that happens. I'm like out of the game during that time. Then I'm out of the game for 2016 as well. And then in 2017, I come back on the box. I make an announcement on January 19th, 2017, that after like 2 years of retirement, I'm finally coming back on a new controller that I'm R&Ding around that time. And that controller is also going to help a bunch of other people in the process. The first day I make my announcement, Leffen decides to strike. Leffen starts to stream, and he starts to say things on his stream about how the box is not necessary, and how the GameCube controller is perfectly fine ergonomically, and how the fact that I injured my hands was all my fault. He's basically saying it was because I had bad posture, stuff like that. 4 years later, we all know that's not true. Right now, the box is the wave. People, like, I almost feel like the game is trending in a direction where the box is going to become like more of a standard than a GameCube controller. Maybe I don't really see why you'd pick up a GameCube controller if you were new to the game right now, because of how many hand issues it threatens you with. But 4 years prior, Leffen was lying about that. He's lying about it right away. And then I already know what this means. The moment that I see Leffen saying those things, I know what it means. I know it means that he's going to try to get the box banned. Because what Leffen's been doing ever since Evidence.zip is he's been deciding on a whim when he doesn't want someone to be in the community. So he started out by basically trying to exclude 3 Swedes from the community: Mike Hager, Rocky, and C. And he seemed to target them because they had some kind of physical or mental handicap, which is fucked up. It's very worrisome, especially when you consider that Leffen has expressed the idea that he's genetically superior to other people. It makes me think that those people were targeted because he actually has a distaste for people with handicaps. That's just the only possible explanation. But nonetheless, over time, Leffen would begin to target people for more political reasons. I was targeted for political reasons from very early on, because I always had radical theories about Melee ever since I was a kid. I'd post some crazy shit on Smash boards, and my predictions would usually be right. I would make predictions about like what the metagame's going to look like in the future, rules that should be implemented, stuff like that. I was right about a lot of it, but Leffen would always try to make it seem like I wasn't a credible guy. He seemed to hate the fact that I had rhetoric that could challenge his. And this ended up being a consistent allegation against Leffen within Evidence.zip. Multiple people said, this guy will treat you like you're a moron if you don't share his opinions. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. There are two MOs that I want you to keep in mind going forward from Evidence.zip, because these MOs will only evolve over time. So the first one is called exclusion. Exclusion is when Leffen decides on a whim that he does not want someone to be in the community, and then he runs a very elaborate campaign to get that person out. And the second MO is that Leffen, from an early age, showed that he wanted everyone to be on board with his rhetoric. So, do you see now where this totalitarianism angle that I presented you with is starting to kick in? Because if someone is showing signs from an early age that they're going to purge political threats and that they're going to purge people with rhetoric that can challenge theirs, that this could potentially evolve into someone who is massively power crazed, someone who tries to enforce uniform thinking onto a community and tries to take down people with large market share or challenging rhetoric. This is exactly what I'm alleging that Leffen has evolved into. Keep that in mind for now. So 2017, I come back on the box, and right away he's targeting my controller. But because of how malicious I know that Leffen is, I already know that this is going to spiral into an elaborate campaign to ban the box completely. Surely enough, 2 months later, I see Leffen at Summit 4, March 2017. And he pulls me aside within like 5 minutes of me getting to the venue, and he starts interrogating me about the box. And every question that he asks me is designed to get me to say something that he can then use against me later, like on social media. Like I already know he's gonna be like, Hacks said this, and so that means this can't be legal, and that means we have to ban the box. Like, he's basically interrogating me in a malicious way. So I have that conversation with him, and then surely enough, 1 week later, he goes on social media, he starts misrepresenting literally everything that I told him, and this is being done with the intention to ban the box. And so I make a tweet at him, and I say, "You're putting words in my mouth, dude. This is extremely malicious what you're doing." And by the way, everything that I'm telling you about right now, this is in chapter 7 of Evidence.zip 2. So I tell him, "You're being extremely malicious, dude. I did not say these things to you. You're misrepresenting right now." And then he says, "No, I have no malicious intent. By the way, I've already contacted your engineer, and I'm scheduled to have a conversation with him." So at that point, I'm like, what the fuck? Because my engineer that I was working with at the time lives 1 hour away from me in New Jersey, and the only place where I had even disclosed his name was in the video that I made on January 19th, where I told people that I was coming back. So this is like, the stalking is evolving. The stalking is evolving. Like, now he's making contact with my engineer. He's triangulating, which is when you infiltrate a social circle. And this was also documented within Evidence.zip, that he triangulates, that he infiltrates people's social circles. That's why in Mike Hager's testimony, for example, Mike Hager says, "He's ripping my entire social life apart." That's a real line from Mike Hager's testimony. So now Leffen's trying to infiltrate my social life by making friends with my engineer. So when I see that, I'm like, what the hell? But I kind of don't think too much of it at the time, but that's going to come into play later. A week later, like a week after Leffen makes contact with my engineer, he starts flooding YouTube with anti-box propaganda. And every single video that he's posting around this time is so flawed. The loopholes in these videos are so egregious. I show this in Evidence.zip 2, where Leffen made like a peach up throw down smash combo out to be so broken. Like he literally told people the box is going to be so broken that its DI is going to change the metagame. 4 years later, this obviously is not the case. I'm still literally the only top level player who even uses a box. And the box's DI is much worse than a GameCube controller's overall, by the way. So Leffen's flat out lying. And so I'm starting to get fed up with what Leffen's doing, because he's really pushing his limits, and I know exactly what his intentions are. So a month later, there's a tournament called Royal Flush. And Leffen got me banned from this tournament, by the way. This tournament's 2 hours away from my house. Leffen contacted the TOs to make sure that I was banned. He was hawking me. This is like when he hawked Rocky. Like, we're under surveillance. Us prospects, you gotta understand, we're literally under surveillance. So he gets me banned from a tournament 2 hours away from my house, but I still go anyway. And something that I left out of Evidence.zip too is on the first day that I get there, there's an interaction where I see Leffen right as I walk into the friendlies room at Royal Flush. And I see him, and I'm just like, hey. And then he goes, oh, you still came. And then I just freeze. I'm like, did he just say that? Did he just really say that to me? Because usually he conceals his intentions better than that. But he literally just said to me, oh, you still came. Which signaled directly to me that he's trying to get me out of this community. He's trying to perform an exclusion. Later that weekend, I find out that the whole reason that Leffen befriended my engineer was so that he could manipulate him into giving a device called the Arduino. This was a device that would help legalize the box. The whole reason Leffen made friends with my engineer was so that he could try to get one of these devices and then use it to sabotage the box legality even harder. So when my engineer discloses this to me on the first day of Royal Flush, I have to literally grab him by his shoulders. Like, I'm grabbing him by his shoulders and I'm shaking him like this. And I'm saying, dude, you don't know who the fuck Leffen is. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You give me that controller right now. You're not giving that controller to Leffen. And then my engineer is so naive. He's saying stuff like, I'm sure he just wants to try it out. And I'm like, oh my god, dude, you don't understand. We're being targeted. We're being targeted right now. So I force him to give me the controller back. Later that day, I'm in the Royal Flush Friendlies room, and I happen to be sitting next to Leffen. I'm also sitting next to Captain Smuckers, Mike Hayes, and Armada. These people will all testify that me and Leffen started to scream at each other, but Leffen lied about how this screaming was initiated. What happened was, I was so fed up with all the bullshit that Leffen was doing that I confronted him and I said, hey dude, that propaganda that you've been putting out on YouTube is very illegitimate. You and I both know that. And then Leffen cuts me off mid-sentence. He cuts me off mid-sentence and starts screaming belligerently. He gets so mad at me for confronting him about the fact that he's pumping out propaganda that he starts screaming belligerently. He rips his controller out of the setup, gets up, and starts walking toward the exit door of the friendlies room. So he's trying to fully avoid having the conversation with me because he knows that if he has a conversation with me about these game mechanics that he's embellishing, that I'm going to win. I'm going to expose his bullshit. So he wants to avoid the conversation and keep lying on social media. So then I scream back at him. I tell him, I know exactly what you're doing, motherfucker, as he walks out the friendlies room. And so that's how that interaction happened. But Leffen later goes on social media and says that I harassed him. So there's a rumor going around to this day that I harassed Leffen, when literally I'm trying to confront him about the fact that he's maliciously putting out propaganda. Big misrepresentation. Later that same day, the Saturday at Royal Flush, Leffen has the absolute audacity to come back into the friendlies room and ask me for the Arduino. So he had found out from my engineer that I had taken the Arduino away from my engineer because I had told my engineer that we were being sabotaged. Leffen has the audacity to come back into the friendlies room and he's wearing like a smile, like a beaming smile. He's like this. And he's like, Max, can I have the Arduino? And I'm like, dude, you can fuck off. And then he says, that Arduino is supposed to be mine. I'm like, you could fuck off, dude. I know exactly what you're doing. So then he angrily leaves the room. I follow him outside of the room, and I'm trying to grab his attention. I'm trying to, like, get this guy's attention to get him to talk to me about how malicious he's being. But he just keeps his face buried in his phone the entire time. He doesn't even turn his head to look at me. Like, I'm to his left. We're walking down a hallway side by side, and he's tweeting in front of my eyes. He's tweeting about me in front of my eyes, and I'm following him down the hallway, trying to get his attention, but he just keeps pacing away from me faster and faster. So then he makes a tweet that suggests that I did something wrong by not giving him the Arduino, and then later that week, he hosts Twitch streams where he tells people that I took a controller away from him that was supposed to be his. Like, he made it sound like I took his controller. He once again misrepresented what actually happened so hard to the point that it is basically illegal defamation. Like, you can't say this about me. He's making me sound like I'm a thief, when Leffen's actually the thief. He's trying to jack our controller. and I'm derailing that from happening. So now there's another rumor that I took a controller from Leffen. And if you read Evidence.zip, there are so many lies like this. Like he calls people thieves, um, stalkers, all sorts of shit that they're not. And he completely distorts the way that the Swedish community perceives certain people. So he was like running the same scams on me that year. He's been running these scams on me for the entire time that we've known each other. But nonetheless, at this point, I am losing my shit with Leffen because this is even more malicious than the way that he treated me back in 2011 and 2012. So I see him lose to Zayn a few weeks later at Smash and Splash 3, and that was a major upset at the time. So I take a shot at Leffen on Twitter, and then Leffen reveals to me that now I'm being blackmailed. On top of everything that he's already doing, he reveals logs in which I had come to him in 2016 with a confession that I had some mental health issues back then. I don't know if you guys remember when I used to tell the community that I had insomnia. That insomnia was because I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I had it for about 5 years, from about 2013 to 2018. And it happened because I didn't understand why this guy was stalking me for so many years on end. When I was a kid, when I was like 16, 17, I didn't understand why this was happening. So I had gone to Leffen in 2016 with that information to try to help me recover. And then in 2017, he uses that to corrupt the box legality proceedings. So now the box legality proceedings are just so beyond fucked. They are being corrupted between propaganda, espionage, blackmail, and it's all being done with the willful and malicious intent to end my career. And the worst part is there's a controller on the line that thousands of players in the future are going to need in order to protect their careers, and Leffen just doesn't give a shit. And he's going to do absolutely anything to get me out of the community. So he's legitimately willing to resort to all of these tactics. So that happens. That's the box legality story. He ultimately fails to ban the box, but my God, the way he corrupted everything that year was horrible. And the fact that that just goes unpunished is exactly the type of stuff that I'm talking about, where no one is aware of the injustices that Leffen gets away with on a regular basis. That all just happened to me, and nothing happened to Leffen. So now fast forward to the end of 2017, and I see that my great friend Hungrybox is now falling prey to Leffen. So what the public sees is that there's just some beef brewing between Hungrybox and Leffen. But what I see is that this is now prospect number 5 at minimum, because you had Mike Hager, Rocky, and C, then you had me, and then Hungrybox was basically becoming a prospect around this time. So the way that I saw that things were going to start heading in the wrong direction was when Leffen decided out of absolutely nowhere that Hungrybox was this deplorable guy. He started tweeting about this in late October of 2017. He just decides out of fucking nowhere that Hungrybox is the most deplorable guy on the planet, and that everyone has a story of Hungrybox being horrible. And it's at this point that I must urge you to research Machiavellianism. Machiavellianism is one of the malevolent personality traits that I talked about in Evidence.zip 2. And what Machiavellianism compels someone to do is craft highly malicious narratives, such as this one, if it will help them defraud someone who's like a threat to them. Like if Leffen could theoretically remove Hungrybox from the ecosystem, then he would go up in terms of market share and in-game ranking. So what you need to know, just as someone who knows what's going on behind the scenes, is that that entire feud was absurdly malicious. And Hungrybox is basically target number 5 at this point, at bare minimum. So, because I saw the way that Leffen was pulling this angle out of his ass, I confronted him at Summit 5, which happened a few days later. I confronted him on the first day, literally like within 1 hour of us getting to the Summit house. I book it to Leffen, because Leffen had just run an elaborate campaign on me that same year in which he was blackmailing me with the intent to end my career. So now I see that he's going to do basically the same thing to Hungrybox, because I knew at the time that Hungrybox had been unfaithful. This was not like super well known, but obviously behind the scenes people knew. And I had the foresight to know that Leffen would blackmail him, because Leffen typically goes after people who he blackmail. He's been doing this ever since Evidence.zip. So I go to him on the first day of Summit 5, and I ask him, why are you going after Hungrybox? And I already know what he's going to say. He's going to say, because he cheated on his girlfriend. And so that's exactly what he says to me. And then I intervene right away. I say, dude, other people in this community have cheated on their girlfriend. For the record, I'm talking about people that are not publicly known. I start listing names. And I'm doing this to expose the hypocrisy, because I know this is a bullshit angle. I want to make it clear between me and Leffen that if he goes forward with blackmailing Hungrybox for that he is a hypocrite, because now he knows that multiple other people have done that. So I spend this entire conversation basically trying to beg Leffen to not go after Hungrybox, because I know that when Leffen goes for someone, it's with the intention of basically ending their career. And this has been documented ever since Evidence.zip. Leffen goes for the kill. He wants to end your career. So when I saw that he had pulled that angle out of nowhere, that Hungrybox was deplorable, I knew exactly where this was going. So I start to beg Leffen. I'm like, please don't do this, man. He's a good guy. You don't need to do this. But there was no getting through to him. So at this point, I'm already fearful that Hungrybox is literally going to lose his career to what Leffen's about to do to him. So down the line, Leffen goes on to upload tons and tons of propaganda. He uploads a video of himself literally stabbing a pancake with a green Jigglypuff drawn on it, which is ridiculous. This shows a high degree of psychopathy. He actually took the time to do that, and he stabbed this pancake many, many times, which is crazy. And then a few months later, he comes out with the video that got like 400,000 hits, the one that's called One of the Many Reasons to Dislike Hungrybox. And in this video, the craziest part about this video is that the public actually entertained Leffen's narrative. Like, Leffen is trying to push this brand new idea that Hungrybox is a terrible guy. And if you look up Machiavellianism, it literally tells you that high mocks will start rumors. And Leffen's been starting rumors like this about people for like almost 10 years at this point. So he's completely making up this narrative, and to make matters even worse, he's exploiting a newcomer named Snowy to push the narrative. There's this kid named Snowy who's featured in that video. And Snowy's sitting next to Leffen, and he's basically agreeing with everything that Leffen is saying, and he's giving like a testimony that supports this narrative. But if you really know how Leffen operates, then the moment that you even open this video, you know that Snowy's getting played. Because Snowy's like a really naive, kind-hearted guy who doesn't know what he's getting involved with. He's getting involved with someone who very maliciously wants to end HBox's career and only wants to use Snowy as a stepping stone in order to do that. And there's a term for that in psychology. It's called abuse by proxy. I explained this in my last video. It's basically when a narcissistic abuser takes advantage of a party who doesn't know any better in order to enact a smear campaign. So it's actually textbook what happened there. That video, though, really started to spiral the hatred out of control. Like, all of a sudden, there started to be this real narrative within the community that HBox was a terrible guy. And for me, this was so crazy to witness, because within Evidence.zip, one of the things it says is that Leffen has successfully manipulated people into hating each other. So that's actually like a premonition of what would end up happening to HBox, because it's like, in 2011, he's manipulating people to hate each other within small pockets. But in 2018, he's going to end up causing crowds to become hostile, like real crowds with large amounts of people in them. Leffen is going to puppeteer these crowds, whether they know it or not, and he's going to create a ton of hostility within the Smash community for the first time ever. Like, the hatred for Hungrybox got out of control that year. I remember I would go to like my local tournament, I still remember this one guy talked to me. He came up to me and he said, "Yo, Hex, I think no, I've heard that Hungrybox like isn't so great of a dude." And I'm like, "Where'd you hear that from?" And he's like, "Oh, Leffen was talking about it." And I'm like, "Oh, you don't say." Fucking made up narrative. This narrative ends up getting so bad that on like the Evo 2018 commentary, Scar and Toph are iterating the sentence. They say, Leffen's been talking about how Hungrybox is a terrible person. He doesn't say terrible player, he says terrible person. You see how just the fact that our commentators are even iterating that sentence is very bad. Because that sentence is being broadcasted to not only like over 100,000 people, but in the Mandalay Bay, the speakers are at the top. And I believe the commentary actually emanates throughout the whole stadium. So the stadium of people is listening to this completely made up narrative. And this is like how you actually incite mass violence is by doing stuff like this. So surely enough, the week after that, Super Smash Con 2018, Hungrybox is completely socially isolated. By this point, everybody hates Hungrybox. And that was when Hungrybox made the tweet that got like 15,000 favorites, the one where he said, "I'm just like a monkey dancing for you guys, huh?" And he said like, "Fuck this community, man." You got to realize that this is all because of Leffen. Like, people are seriously not connecting the dots. People are not understanding that highly malicious political campaigns are being run on people with the intent to end their career by any means necessary. The guy is using blackmail, the guy is inciting mass hatred, he's spreading rumors, and this is on your rank 1 player. So now within like a 1 year span, he's done this to me and he's done it to Hungrybox. So you have like a top 10 player and a rank 1 player both getting blackmailed out of their careers. This is career murder. This is happening in front of your eyes. People have decided that this is now entertainment. This is no longer injustice. This is now entertainment. That's how backwards the situation has gotten. So Hungrybox nearly loses his career to this. It takes massive amounts of damage control and recovery that he never should have had to go through in order to undo what Leffen did to him. It took him like another maybe 2 years to recover his rep fully. Now he's very well liked again, thank goodness, as he deserves to be. But his rep was completely trashed. And that was just another classic Leffen con that Leffen never faced any accountability for. So now, fast forward to no, actually, don't fast forward. No, actually, yes, fast forward. By the end of the HBox Con, the craziest thing about all of this is that Leffen actually walks away from this as the hero. Let me tell you why that's really bad. So this is where Leffen starts to pick up his hero status, and this is when people start to think that he's like an anti-hero because he has become the heel to Hungrybox, and Hungrybox is like the supervillain of Melee. But let me tell you why that's really bad. Because we've already established that Leffen is someone who behaves highly maliciously. So by making the mistake of thinking that this guy's the hero, you're actually enabling him to con people harder in the future a lot easier than before. Because if someone is perceived as a hero, then people are going to side with the things that they tell people to do. So this is like a layer of crowd psychology. See, this is where crowd psychology is now coming into play. Because by thinking that Leffen's the hero, you're going to start to side with him when he abuses people again in the future or does highly malicious things in the future. And so I always knew that the fact that he was able to walk away with hero status was gonna ramp things up exponentially and make things even worse from there. And then surely enough, at the end of 2018, this is when the next con happens. So this one, in the Melee community's eyes, is not perceived as a con. But in my eyes, it absolutely is. So this is when Leffen bullies Salem. And people don't even remember that Leffen bullied Salem. People think that Leffen saved the world from Salem. But if you look at what happened, this is yet another case of Leffen being heavily rewarded for bullying someone. You see, the scene is actually trending heavily towards bullying culture because of Leffen. Like, if you read Evidence.zip 1, it'll enlighten you as to the type of person who's being rewarded for running these types of cons on people. And it really makes the Salem con a lot less appealing once you realize that Salem was basically a nerd sitting in their room trying to enjoy the new Smash game that had just come out. And then Leffen appears in their comments section on Twitter. 2 days later, Salem's entire rep is over. See, Leffen is putting people like me, Hungrybox, and Salem, and other people too, people like Samox, Alpha Zealot, etc., into massively bad PR situations. These are situations that we should not be in. He's destabilizing society because he's created a culture of hatred. He's caused the community to trend toward dystopia in a lot of ways. He's really shifted the atmosphere of this community. And the Salem beef proves that, because Leffen ends up getting rewarded basically in this situation because Salem gets baited into writing Years of Research. And Years of Research, the thing you got to realize about it is Salem was very triggered when they wrote that. Salem probably doesn't mean half the shit that they say in Years of Research, but some of the things within Years of Research are actually very accurate. One of the paragraphs in Years of Research says that Leffen's brand increases with his malicious intent. This is completely accurate, but the community is dropping the ball. The community is instead rewarding that malicious intent. And like I said, if you read Evidence.zip, it'll enlighten you as to who you're allowing to grow more powerful with each of these cons. Nonetheless, that's not how the community viewed it. Half a year later, 2 months later, Salem loses their sponsor, and then half a year later, Leffen and Salem face off at Super Smash Con, and there's a massive mob of people surrounding the match, surrounding the stage, and Salem is considered the supervillain of the century. And I'm sitting back watching this, like, this is actually horrible. This is actually like highly evolved bullying culture. I really don't think you're considering people like Salem's mental health when you choose to do things like this to them, because many people have suffered from mental health decline because of Leffen. And while I don't talk to Salem at all, I wouldn't be surprised if that situation caused some sort of mental health issue, because that's like a very traumatizing situation. You're just trying to enjoy the new Smash game in your room, and then all of a sudden you're being surrounded by a literal sea of people that hates you. So again, I'm not fond of this either, but at the time, I'm powerless to express that opinion because the crowd is so in favor of what Leffen is doing. So, you see, you've already got a new list of victims after the first Evidence.zip. You got people like me. I'm on both victim lists. I'm on the victim list for Evidence.zip 1 and post Evidence.zip. So basically Evidence.zip 2. Hungrybox, that's a new victim. Salem, that's a new victim. All these people are basically having their entire careers or reputations put in jeopardy by Leffen. It's just become so normalized. And before Leffen existed, there was nothing like that. Like, this legitimately destabilizes the job market within the game, because you can suddenly just become targeted and lose your entire rep. What's the point of trying to build a career in this game over the course of many years if you can just be targeted like that and lose it all, out of nowhere? It's really unappealing, honestly. So there's already like a new list of victims, but nobody's viewing it that way. The community thinks that the whole box thing was being done in good faith. The community thinks that the Hungrybox thing and the Salem thing were hero narratives in Leffen's favor. So you're going on 2 hero narratives. I'm going on 0. I've seen nothing heroic. I've seen blackmail, corruption, bullying. I'm seeing dystopia. But that's because I'm coming from the perspective of Evidence.zip 1. So we're living in 2 different worlds. And that idea of 2 different worlds is really important here. There's a quote within Evidence.zip that's written by C, so in the third testimony, and that quote says, "The chasm between what Leffen and his sympathizers manipulates people into believing is going on versus what is really going on is so drastic that it's inconceivable. C says something along those lines, and C was describing how that effect had been created in Sweden way back in the day. But if you look at the situation in recent years, it's absolutely accurate once again, because the vast majority of people are not seeing the truth about what's really going on in these scenarios. But because I have Evidence.zip 1's perspective, I see it clear as day. So I'm basically seeing the exact path of destruction that I predicted, and it's not pretty. As someone who's been in the game for 16 years, I'm very unfond of the way that the game has trended from 2011 and on. So now, 2020 is when one of the absolute most tragic things I've ever witnessed happens. This is when I realized that things within this community are like reaching the point of absolutely no return. It's almost like I'm living in hell. What I witnessed in summer 2020 is so inconceivable. It's just so hard to believe that it's even real. So I'm referring to the Me Too movement. This is legitimately one of the darkest things that I've ever witnessed in my entire life. When that Me Too movement first happened, people didn't know what to believe. People were very naive as to the fact that there were sexual predators within the Smash community. Just to shed some insight so that people are less naive in general, there are surely still sexual predators in the Smash community. Me Too did not weed out all of them. That's just how the world works. The problem, though, is that when Leffen jumped to the podium for Me Too, no one, and I mean no one, questioned why he jumped to the podium. You've got someone now with 2 lists of victims to his name, and this is the guy jumping to the podium on frame 1 for a Me Too movement. Let me shed some light into why this was all a scam. So, in Evidence.zip 2, I explained the diagnosis called Dark Triad. Dark Triad is basically the diagnosis that's being alleged against Leffen within Evidence.zip. The Swedes are trying to tell you that he is narcissistic and psychopathic to a dangerous degree, and that he's highly manipulative. This is an actual clinical diagnosis called the Dark Triad. So, this basically means that someone is extremely malevolent, and it would be in your best interest to always assume malicious intent and deception. Never assume good faith. It's like you'd be a fool to assume good faith if it's a dark triad, especially if it's like a high degree dark triad. So within psychology books, I've linked the page to this on both my last YouTube video as well as on Twitter. There's a page from a psych book. I think it's the American Psychological Association. They have this book, and it was made in 2020. And it says, dark triads will signal virtuous victimhood in order to basically scam their surrounding community. Basically, you do a virtue signal with a victim signal. And this is extremely effective when it's done at the right time for making people admire you. And then you get things like money and fame out of your community. And I'm absolutely alleging beyond any reasonable doubt that that's why Leffen jumped to the helm of Me Too. You might not like to hear that, but it's what happened. And you should know that all 4 people who were victims of the original Evidence.zip all agree that it was fraud. And then I was talking to Hungrybox last year while this was actively going on, because me and Hungrybox were both targets from the newer era. And we were DMing each other like, do you see this bullshit? This guy just jumped to the helm of a Me Too movement, and now he's talking about how bad it is to blackmail and abuse people. Like he's literally saying, he's literally condemning people for doing things like blackmailing people and abusing people in his video from July 2nd, when he has been running elaborate schemes on people to blackmail them out of their careers, and he's been doing this for the past 10 years. On top of that, what completely seals the deal is the fact that the victim testimony. So what Leffen does in his July 2nd YouTube videos, he gives a victim testimony, and he says that because of that victim testimony that he gave, he can resonate with victims of sexual predators. The victim testimony Leffen gave is completely fake. So the victim testimony that he gave is a story of how he took a road trip at Genesis 2. And when he took this road trip at Genesis 2, there was this guy named C, one of the original Evidence.zip prospects. And Leffen claims that C slapped him 8 times for no reason. Leffen also makes other claims about C within that video, about how like C was stealing money, doing other stuff like that. And if you open Evidence.zip, multiple testimonies say Leffen has been lying about this story for like 10 years or 9 years at the time. Like, people cannot stop him from lying about this story. So for example, C never stole money. C had borrowed money and failed to pay it back in time. So now Leffen's actually getting on a video with 800,000 views and implicating somebody as a thief. And that person is not a thief. So again, unlawful defamation. But far more importantly, he's implicating this person as an abuser. When the crazy part about this story is that Leffen was actually the abuser. What happened during this trip was C fought for Leffen to be on the trip in the first place. C was the one like running the show for this trip. He was organizing it, and I think some of the other people did not want Leffen to go. And C was like, no, like let's try to get him to reform a little bit. Because I think the other people didn't want him on the trip because he was a brat. But then C really fought for Leffen to come. So then Leffen's able to come on the trip because of C. And then Leffen, during that trip, immediately starts to completely fuck up the trip. Like, he starts harassing C for every single day of the trip. And he goes so far out of his way to prevent the hike to the Grand Canyon from happening. That was like the main reason that C wanted to go on this trip. He starts to like wake C up in the middle of the night, maximize the TV's volume to like cause C fucking ear pain, and C reaches the point where he can't take it anymore, so he slaps Leffen. Leffen later gets revenge during this trip, during the flight home, by jamming his plane seat into C's knees multiple times. Like, he literally jams the plane seat into C's knees twice, and this causes C knee pain for multiple weeks. So that's actually the worst physical assault within this entire story, is the way that Leffen jammed the plane seat. But you see, Leffen is using this as a victim testimony to take the helm of the Me Too movement. And this is actually the most malicious and backwards thing that I've ever seen. And when I spoke with C a few months ago, I said, yo, dude, do you see what he's saying? You see what he's saying about you? Like, I know the Evidence.zip testimony is way different from this. And this is when C starts to suggest that Leffen may actually deserve to be in jail. Because the fact that his lies are escalating to the point that they are, like when you start to, tally everything that the guy has done. 2017, he defrauds a controller's legality process through lies and other malicious methods. 2018, he almost pushes Hungrybox out of the entire community through those same methods. 2019, he instigates, he basically bullies Salem out of the community. But now, 2020, he's lying to people about a situation where he's claiming he's the victim and he's actually the abuser. And everyone's just automatically believing him, when he's this guy who has literally two lists of victims. So I'm witnessing this, and as someone who's been on both lists, I'm disgusted. I'm like, this is like a sin against humanity. People have no idea what's really going on here, and it's so sad, the gap within this community. So Leffen picks up a ton of followers, of course, from doing that. It's just like the Salem situation, where he actually like picks up a ton of followers from doing something malicious. And you might be thinking, well, what does it matter if he did it with malicious intent if he helped victims? Because it is true that Leffen made a bunch of good tweets that week, during the Me Too week, that were very good for victims to read. Well, I'll tell you the problem with it. The problem with it is that you have someone with malicious intent growing stronger. So that means that when Leffen pulls off cons later down the line, he's going to have a lot more sway. because he picked up a lot more clout from the Me Too thing. Zero also gets knocked off the totem pole during that Me Too thing. And so now Leffen actually has the biggest following in the community. And so this is very bad because you have someone who's actively behaving maliciously if you really like look at the motivations behind all of his actions, and he's acquiring a bigger and bigger following. And this can only be a sign of bad things to come. So the perfect example of a bad sign of things to come would happen about half a year later when Samox debuts Metagame. Because now you see the community is so gapped by this point in terms of perception and reality. They believe Leffen to be someone who he completely is not, because he's basically just crafted 3 hero narratives from him for himself between the HBox feud, the Salem feud, and the Me Too involvement. But in reality, this is someone who is still carrying that same malicious intent with him. So when Samox debuts Metagame and shows footage of Rocky, you see how now it all comes full circle. I started the video by telling you about Rocky, but now you're seeing how Leffen acquired the power to censor the press. So now he has the power to censor the press based on past actions that people misinterpreted. And being able to censor the press that easily is extremely dangerous. This is where I start to use the term totalitarianism, because one of the aspects of a totalitarian society is that the press is fully under control, meaning there is however much censorship and propaganda necessary to brainwash the masses into believing things that are not true. So the way that Leffen got Metagame censored so easily, and then comes back 4 years later with a hero narrative, believe it or not, you're actually starting to witness something that's way more in line with totalitarianism than you may think. Because he's able to wipe out the fact that he heinously abused someone with a hearing aid and come back with a story that heroizes him instead. This is massively corrupt. And now you see how he's able to boss around people like Samox and Alpha Zealot. So now people like Samox and Alpha Zealot have no choice but to submit to Leffen's desires. So you see how this is all a snowball that begins to spiral out of control. If you actually, research other societies that were ultimately conquered and became totalitarian, you'll witness very similar patterns to this one. You witnessed massive corruption occur just recently in the Smash community when Samox had to issue that 9th episode of Metagame. But people may not have realized that. So you had the Metagame con. But now in 2021, there are 2 more cons I want to talk about. And these cons, again, are made easier for Leffen because of all the clout that he's picked up from those prior ones. So the first con is the Hax's Nightclub con. So at the beginning of this year, I held an online event, a free event for the East Coast on January 2nd, 2021, and we got nearly 600 entrants. And so we were looking to do that event every week, every Saturday, that there wasn't that there wasn't another tournament happening on that date, because obviously we're not going to overrun another tournament. And so Leffen, seeing that his longtime adversary had just set up a massively successful tournament, wanted to say something about that. Just like how he wanted to say something about the box's legality 4 years prior. Just like how he wanted to say something about my Smashboards theory crafting 4 to 5 years before that. See how the surveillance never ends. People are legitimately being placed under surveillance by Leffen. So now he wants to do something about Hax's Nightclub, but he has to do it in a deceptive way because we don't allow people to blatantly overrun each other's tournaments. So what he does is he starts by setting up Levo on January 3rd, the day after Hax's Nightclub. He announces that he's starting up a series called Levo. But the catch is that Levo is only for Europe. So everyone sees this, and they don't even realize what Leffen just did. What Leffen just did is blatantly directed at myself. He's not starting up a Saturday weekly series the day after my Saturday weekly series has a massively successful opening event for no reason. This is going to be a long con. Actually, it's not going to be that long. The next stage of the con is going to take place in less than 2 weeks from that point. So, what he does on January 14th, I believe, is he announces that the next Levo, the one that's coming up in 2 Saturdays from then, will add a North American bracket. And you see what he did just there is he actually overran the second Hax's Nightclub event without anyone realizing it. And if you Google the term totalitarian tiptoe, there's an actual term for the procedure that Leffen just followed. See, the procedure he just followed is he said, well, if I just slap my tournament right on top of Hax's, people are going to notice. People are going to notice that I breached community policy. So what I have to do instead is I have to slither in. And this is an actual totalitarian strategy to get people to agree to terms that they would normally reject. Like, you get people to agree to an end point. You get them from A to Z without realizing that they agreed to Z, because you did it in such a sneaky way. You took baby steps, whereas if you jumped straight to Z, people would say, whoa, 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 you can't jump straight to Z. So you take baby steps instead. So he's actually able to perform an overrun of a free tournament series, and he is not only overrunning it with just any tournament series, he's actually overrunning it with a sub-tournament series. So this is insanely greedy and malicious, because he's literally telling East Coasters from North America that he wants them to have to sub to him on Twitch to play in a tournament, rather than enter a free tournament that was just set up for them. So he's willing to actually con the community in order to con me. It's incredibly selfish, but that's what he did. And then the crazy part is that 2 days after that, he decides he's going to launch another con on me. Like, the malicious intent really never stops with this guy. So this is when the L-canceling con happens. The L-canceling con is when Leffen starts streaming every day, telling people that the box is designed improperly because it doesn't have the R button on its home row. It has the Z button on its home row. So in Melee, you can L-cancel with either L or R, or with Z. The reason Z is better to L-cancel with is because it doesn't lock you out of tech. So that's why the box has the Z button on its home row, because you almost never want to tech at the same time that you L-cancel. And I had to make a YouTube video fully explaining why this is the case in February because of how many rumors Leffen would end up spreading. But in January, you see, Leffen really wanted to maintain the angle that it was better to L-cancel with R, just so he could say that his box button layout was better than mine. And this is a sign of extreme narcissism, because what Leffen basically did was he got a box in the mail. He took it out of the box, no pun intended, and he immediately looked to criticize it. He immediately looked to find flaws in it, and the flaw that he would try to point out that really ended up screwing things up was when he tried to tell people that the R button should actually be on the home row, because objectively it shouldn't. Objectively, the Z button is better to L-cancel with, and on top of that, you actually screw up multiple other things by putting R on the home row. And Leffen would not have experience with any of those things, because I believe that was his first time, like, seriously trying the box out. And he was making these executive decisions within like 1 hour of using the box, and he was telling 1,500 viewers at a time that they should listen to what he was saying. So now he's actually defrauding a company. This is not a joke. My company has shareholders, and he's basically defrauding me and my shareholders by spreading false information about our product. And so my company has not only shareholders, but it also has multiple what can be considered representatives. All the moderators in my Discord can be considered representatives, because they're all very well educated on how the box works. And so the moment that they saw Leffen was broadcasting this information, they started to panic because they knew that this was false info. So over the course of the next few weeks, 3 different moderators try to go into Leffen's chat, and they try to say, hey dude, please stop spreading this information. This is very damaging misinformation. And what Leffen does to the first moderator's name is Slamist, he literally blocks him from his Twitch stream. So you know how in Leffen's Twitch bio, it says that he won't hesitate to ban trolls and idiots? What Leffen actually means by that is he'll block anyone who does not agree with him. So Slamist goes into Leffen's chat and he says, Leffen, you're wrong. It's better to L cancel with Z. Please stop telling people this. Please stop telling people otherwise. Leffen becomes extremely narcissistic in response to this. He blocks Slamist, and then he starts to roast Slamist in front of everybody, and he starts to refer to me as an evil overlord. So he starts going crazy, basically. And this starts to spiral things out of control, because Leffen gets like 1,500 viewers at a time when he streams. So all of my hard work is rapidly being undone in front of my eyes. And then Altimore, that's the next mod, goes in 6 hours later to try to elaborately explain to Leffen why he's wrong. And Leffen wasn't really hearing him out either. So then 6 days or so later, another moderator named Otak goes in. And once again, Leffen's not willing to listen to Otak whatsoever. So all these company representatives who are trying to tell Leffen that this is incorrect are not able to get through to him. He's repeatedly censoring these people one way or another. And this is massive corruption. This is actually not a joke that he's defrauding a company by spreading false info about its product. So over the course of January, hundreds and hundreds of people start to believe that they should L cancel the wrong way, and they start to believe that the box is designed incorrectly too, when neither of those things are true. And then I start to get very pissed off because I'm witnessing all of this happen to the box community. So I start to get kind of hot-tempered in some of my responses to customers. And one customer says something like, the player Pipsqueak, that he likes Leffen's layout too. And then I say, Pipsqueak is Leffen's bitch. That doesn't make the layout any better. And then Pipsqueak sees that, takes it to Twitter, and now I'm in a bad PR situation. I'm actually in another bad PR situation because of Leffen. You see how it's so normal for people to find themselves in bad PR situations because of Leffen. So now I look like a bad person because no one on Twitter saw the sequence of events that led to this happening, and I end up having to issue an apology, and I lose like 1,000 followers. A sponsor who was talking to me at the time also stopped talking to me. So these bad PR situations are absolutely not a joke. Leffen's actually playing games with people's livelihoods by spreading these lies. And you see how this is what I meant when I said that nothing good would come of him being able to acquire a larger following and a larger and increased credibility from those previous cons that people interpreted as him being heroic. Because now going up against Leffen becomes even more hopeless. He's able to lie or do things like overrun your tournament, and you're just not able to do anything about it. You may not realize this, but you're quickly trending toward a culture where if Leffen decides that he wants to do something massively corrupt to you, you just literally have to run away. You have to fold. You have to say, oh, it's Leffen. That's it. So you see, the entire argument that I've been trying to craft for you this entire time is that he's starting to become way too above the law, to the point that it very much so resembles totalitarianism. So I apologize if my previous video used references that disturbed people or made them uncomfortable. I totally made some mistakes with that video, but the premise of the video was very much so accurate. And there are even more signs to further prove that the premise is accurate. Such as the fact that Leffen has declared, literally, that he'd become the one true God. If someone ever said something like that outside of the gaming realm, you would actually interpret it as someone who seeks totalitarianism. What I'm trying to tell you is that this isn't a joke. If you look at the way that every political situation is approached with the intention of maximizing influence and taking down those who pose a threat to influence, it actually becomes clear as day what's going on. There's also the fact that he's exhibiting some antisocial tendencies in front of your very eyes on a daily basis on social media that people are not paying enough attention to, such as the fact that he's mass censoring people. He's the only person in the entire community that mass censors people on Twitter and Twitch. He's also the only person in the entire community that does something that's very similar to state terrorism. So state terrorism is when you basically instill fear into your citizens in order to keep them in line. When Leffen scans social media to reply to people who don't have too much of a large following on their tweets, or when he quote retweets people to embarrass them, it's actually a social media equivalent of state terrorism. And just like the community has started to glorify Leffen's bullying, the community has also begun to glorify those social media tendencies. The community acts as if all these things are normal, and they're not really realizing what's going on here, because a lot of the patterns being followed are actually one-to-one with totalitarian regimes. And so the reason that I made my video was because, like I said, that revised version of metagame, if I didn't intercept it and raise doubt to its legitimacy, could have pushed things past the point of no return. Because letting Leffen rewrite the press like that right in front of your eyes is insanely corrupt. There's no arguing it. But there's actually a lot more corruption going on within this community, and it's all emanating from Leffen. So I've been aware of this for a long time, having come from Evidence.zip 1, and I've seen that as time goes on, less and less people have the courage to call this out. So I needed to stand up to what was going on, even if it put me under the line of fire. That being said, I'm hopeful that this video is received better than my previous one, because I've omitted all the things that seem to disturb people. I definitely did not present that video in the ideal way, but it was still good for conveying the facts in detail about each of the cons and breaking the ice about the overall premise about what I know to be going on within this community. So now that brings me to the end of this video, just in terms of what I believe needs to happen. Well, I'll tell you outright that I'm in favor of banning Leffen. I'm in favor of not only banning, but also deplatforming him. Because if you look at Evidence.zip, the first one, which I provided for you, and you look at what's predicted within that collection of documents, and then you look at the status quo today, it actually went about as badly as it possibly could have. Meaning all the predictions came true, but I think they came true to a higher degree than we ever could have imagined. I think there's a lot of things wrong with the status quo. There's a lot of things that I didn't even mention in this video, like the fact that Leffen regularly attacks our tournament organizers, who we wouldn't even have a scene without, or the fact that Leffen is clearly intent on infesting other gaming communities, like when he goes into the Tekken communities and the COD communities and immediately beefs with some of their people just to create drama. I don't think any of these things are good things, and I don't think there's any reforming this individual either. I think even if there was theoretically a way to reform him, I think he's already gone well past the point of what should earn someone a ban. That being said, I'm also aware that I'm building a case against someone who is highly above the law, so I won't be surprised at all if he's not banned. I'm just letting you know that I'm pro-ban, and I think I've provided sufficient argument for that angle to make sense. So, as I said at the end of my last video, I'm interested in hearing what people have to say about this. I mostly just want to present the other side, because I feel like right now everyone is kind of just conforming to the status quo, and there's actually a lot wrong with the status quo, no doubt about it. So again, thanks for watching this video. I hope I proved to you that there was always merit to this. I just may not have presented it properly in my last video. So regardless of what decision the community makes, I did need to get this off my chest. Thank you for watching, and take care.